Harry on stage to deliver his speech.
Guests, members of the advisory panel, parents here, teachers, executive committee members, press corps, helpers, chairs, and delegates. And that should be everyone. Good morning. As one of the co-founders of ISMUNHK, it brings me great joy to see it reach its 7th anniversary. It seems not that long ago that I was on the executive committee, as Gia mentioned, first as the DSG in 2018, ISMUNHK 2018, and then the Secretary General in 2019. I currently sit on the advisory panel for ISMUNHK, and to put this 7-year journey shortly, I've been here for too long. But in any event, one of the founding principles of ISMUNHK down the years and including this year is to make MUN accessible. Indeed, I remember my first MUN conference being rather expensive, and I didn't know exactly what I was doing. So if you're feeling the same, I can tell you you are not alone. Now, throughout the years, the executive committee each and every year works hard to ensure that all participants are well supported at ISMUNHK conferences. Now, for example, you might have joined our day camps that we organize and have been introduced to the basics of MUN. We also allocate each of you to your individual council rooms based on your experiences so that no one will feel out of place. We also do our best to keep our application fees affordable, and in which no small part is because of our very generous support from our co-organizers, as Gia mentioned, the Hong Kong Metropolitan University. Now, throughout the years, they have very kindly provided a venue for us, as well as impeccable logistical support, again, throughout the years to allow us to run the conference smoothly. Therefore, it is only right that I thank them sincerely at the outset. Intuitively, I think most of us will agree that making MUN more accessible is a good thing. It sounds right. But why is that? I suspect that the answer lies in part of this year's conference's theme, which is forging diplomacy within dialogue. Dialogue, much like tango, takes two, although one may say that you cannot tango with more than two. Dialogue is also similar to tango in that the dancers may have to adjust their dance routine based on who the dance partner is. Depending on who we are speaking to, we might also have to adopt different techniques even to convey the same message. And when we do so, we are seeking to forge diplomacy. And as a side note, I'm not a dancer, so it may be completely wrong, my analogy of tango. Now, going back to speech, which I'm more familiar with, we do this, for example, by creating a good connection between the speaker and the audience. Now, one might try to find something that both sides can relate to, and hence why we sometimes find a speaker who is of a similar age or similar background to be more relatable. And since they don't have to overcome a generational gap, so to speak. Now, this is sometimes referred to as soft diplomacy. We also consciously try to forge diplomacy in different ways in our dialogues with other people. If we see someone struggle with the English language or any language, we might choose to speak Chinese or some other language that you know. If we find the other person to be rather quiet, we might try to change the topic and get the other person involved. These are all examples of us trying better to relate to the party or the parties that we are talking to. The overarching principle, in my view at least, is that you need to know your audience. This speech would have been crafted quite differently if I'm speaking to a different audience. For example, all university students or students who have never done MUN in their life before. That might be the case for some of you, at least you're now at your first MUN conference. The reason why I say this is because to them, diplomacy may be applied in very different contexts. Now, as delegates then, how does diplomacy apply to everyone? Now, first and foremost, I think the most important part is to know your chairs. They are the people who are in charge of your council room, and they have the final say on many things, including on who gets the various awards. So get on their good books. That's the first advice. Now, there's no one single way of doing so, but the most obvious way is through reading the chair reports, which hopefully you have done. If you have not, please don't let me know. And this is the first chance you get to know your chairs, so to speak. Now, I do not mean merely their personal views on the topics, but I also refer to how they might be as a person. You see these through how they write their reports, how they write their introductions. So for example, do they at least try to sound cool and laid back? Or are they more formal? That's the first judgment call you may make. This will affect your whole approach to the conference. If your chair is more laid back, you might slip in a joke here or there. Please do not take this as an invitation to mess around. I will not be responsible personally, and in any event, I won't be here to be responsible. The observations should also not stop here. There are preferences that you can only see when you meet them, your chairs, at the conference. For example, are they very strict with time? Do they tend to extend POIs? Or do they seem to want delegates to address specific topics that at least they themselves think are central to the issue? These are all observations that you can make and adopt your approach accordingly. Now, it might seem obvious to observe the preferences of your chairs, but it should be equally important to observe your fellow delegates. Whilst to some of you it may feel like they are just your competitors, but whichever way you want to see it, you have to be able to work with a good number of them to ensure that you can gather the support needed when it comes to voting. It is a bit more difficult to learn about your fellow delegates before the conference, and this is why the opening speeches are quite important. To some, they might be half-focused at this stage because you cannot raise POIs at this stage, and it's rather early in the morning. But however, a good delegate will already be sending out notes to try and form blocks with other delegates. But it shouldn't end here either, because the best delegates, and no pun intended, will be both noting each delegate's position on the topic, but also their style and demeanor. For instance, how prepared is this delegate? Have they done a lot of research? Is this delegate particularly confident in what they're saying and the stance they're taking? Now, all this affects the dynamics of the council. It might seem easier to persuade less confident delegates or delegates who don't have as strong of a stance, but this is at the same time, it might well be a double-edged sword, in that these delegates may easily defect from your bloc. Too many strong-minded delegates in the same bloc often results in arguments and passive-aggressive jostling to be the main submitters of the resolution. I'm not speaking from experience. A good delegate tries to find a balance of both in the bloc. Now, of course, that often is out of your hands. For example, if the topic is the China and USA trade war, for example, the delegates of China and USA cannot, no matter how compatible they are as people, be in the same bloc. For reasons hopefully that is obvious. Now, the best delegates in any event will know how to manage the different characters in each of their own blocs. It is of course easier said than done, and happily I don't have to do it, I only have to say it. As a debater and law graduate myself, however, we tend to be too combative. It's not our usual approach to seek some sort of compromise, because it is always a zero-sum game. You win your case or you lose your case. You win the debate or you lose the debate. There's no any middle ground to speak of. But in NUN, that mindset must be thrown out the window. You do not seek to win by running the best argument, nor do you win by dominating over everyone else. This is a note I wish was made available to my younger self, who definitely took up too much speaking time. And the best delegates only speak when they need to. They observe the debate and seek to understand the various issues at stake, as well as each delegate's viewpoint. And when they do speak, they basically pierce through this battleground with a sensible compromise. Their speech is impactful because they turn what used to be a debate into negotiation. I always aspire to be one of those delegates. I don't think I ever truly was. But when we sit as chairs, we really appreciate these delegates, because all conferences, like it or not, have limited time. And realistically, we can only allow debates to last so long. So if everyone ends up voting in exactly the same way as they started before the debate, then the debate itself happened for no good reason. The upshot, I think, is that you should think before you speak, or more accurately, think whether you need to speak. There's little point in joining pointless debate, either in MUN or in life, so pick your battles wisely, because it is the quality of your speeches that will matter, not the quantity. Now, dialogue, and by extension diplomacy, are of course not limited to the MUN context. And one of the takeaways for me from MUN, since I have, in a sense, graduated from delegating or chairing, is that I learned to resist the debater's urge, or the lawyer's urge, if you will, to want to win every single argument. Again, it is about picking your battles and knowing what matters to you, or in some cases, your client, or in your experience as a delegate, to your country, the most. Now, this is not to say you should allow yourself to be pushed around. But if you're always unwilling to make a compromise, you end up making more enemies than friends. And that, not just in MUN, but in life, is usually a bad idea, because you usually find it better to have an additional friend than an additional enemy. There's always some form of diplomacy in dialogue, be it the use of a language that everyone understands, or simply the act of looking at the people you're speaking at. So please, in your opening speeches, don't just look at your notes. But the topic I've been asked to address, and hopefully did, is the forging of diplomacy within dialogue. And that requires conscious effort and learning from mistakes, which is one of the benefits of MUN, amongst many others. As I've said in my opening speech, back when I was the Secretary General, not that many years ago, if you can believe it, any mistakes you make as a delegate in MUN does not have real-world consequences. No country will go to war because of a resolution you passed. MUN, in a way, is a sandbox for you to experiment and learn. And again, I do call back my reminder of not to mess around, because I will not be responsible for them. But in any event, when you go into your conference room later on, hopefully you'll be able to experiment with and apply some of the tips that I've mentioned. For example, make the most of the opening speeches to learn about your fellow delegates. As I've said, dialogue should be a two-way street. Hence, I'm going to answer a few questions I think submitted at this point. Thank you very much.